What's going on, Michelle?
How are you?
I'm good. Here we are again. I mean, you and I had a great conversation yesterday. We tried this podcast before. I've got great content that we did, right? But it felt kind of scripted. And I think that, with our backgrounds and where we've been, what we've done, and where we are right now, I think people just need to hear what it's like to be in the grind of a struggling artist. And you and we fell. I shouldn't say we fell, but we were at the top of our games in the corporate world. And it's we're in a tough place. Uh Following something we deeply believe in, right? And you're an artist, I'm a writer, and I'm putting my heart and soul into this. Um, and so and yesterday you and I connected about this, right? You called me, you reached out, and you were,
Yeah.
hey, you know, um, a lot was on your mind, and I know what's on your mind. It's tough. You're having a tough time. You're having tough days.
Yeah, I mean, like it's interesting because, having left corporate, I had some very solid skills that I had developed. Um, but now as a creative person, I there are skills that I need to lean on that weren't skills that I developed in my corporate life. So I have no sales and marketing and PR background at all. And the two rails that a creative person's train runs on are your art, and that has to be solid and good. But you also have your second rail, which is sales and marketing and PR. And if they're not both, you don't have mastery in both, it's really difficult to get the train to go down the track. So initially, when I reached out to you, I don't think we ever actually talked about what I called you about, which
Oh,
is the
really?
irony of it. Yeah, because my challenge is right now is really figuring out how to tell my story because
Yeah.
people keep telling me, "Oh, your story's so interesting. I really want to hear about it." I have a friend who is an artist that I met on one of my artist platforms. We met about, I don't know, I think it's hard to imagine. It's only been 6 to 9 months that we met. And we started talking, and she was thinking about shifting her life um, and leaving her position in order to pursue her art and motherhood full time. And she wasn't really sure, and she was kind of thinking about where to funnel her energy. And I was like, what do you really want? What do you really want? And she took a month or two to process it and then decided to commit to pursuing her artwork and to double down on motherhood. And she says that it was our conversations that changed her life, and that she feels that I could really help other people by talking about my experience and tying that back in through my art. And I keep feeling like I'm doing that. But then I keep getting the feedback that I'm not doing that. And so the reason I called you was when we did the podcast together, that was my first opportunity, Randy, to really start to tell my story in a particular way. And I had wanted to ask you when I called you, like, is my story actually interesting? Is it compelling? Because I'm so busy being me
Yeah.
that I don't think about it like that I'm impacting other people. And actually that's one of the reasons I called you is because you had told me that my story, my pathing was inspiring to you. And I had wanted to get that feedback. And then we just ended up having this kind of magical conversation because it looks like we're both in this place of figuring out how to be all the parts of the business and all the parts of the creative simultaneously. And that's how we ended up here today. From my perspective, I think
Yeah.
Maybe from yours it
Yeah.
might be a little different, but
No, it's look, the reason I started down my path is that I believed and believe that I have a story, a personal and professional story that's relatable to people. And when you called me yesterday and we started talking a little bit about this, I quickly again realized that I'm unable to break the glass of my story. And I know for a fact, and very close people to me have said, Randy, you got to get raw if you want to succeed in this space. You have to make like what you're doing, the writing you're doing, the book that I'm working on completing here shortly, The Art of Transformation, is based on my personal and professional experiences. And I have a million stories to tell that tie into all that, but I can't get those out. And like I told you yesterday, you're right. What When I saw you on LinkedIn a year ago, I mean, I kept watching your videos and I finally reached out and we had a conversation and you told me, "Hey, I just started doing artwork 4 or 5 years ago." And I'll go back to that first video I saw where you were going through the details of how what you were doing to this paper and then how you converted all this into this incredible art. And I'm thinking there's no possible way you started this like 4 or 5 years ago. So, but then I also know you because we went to business school together, right? Like
yeah.
that's like we were in business school. That's the crazy part of all this. And so there's this whole other life that we lived, and now you're doing this, and I'm like, Michelle, like there's a powerful story behind your artwork. And yesterday I remember I said something that I've been thinking about your artwork is that the value of your artwork is the story behind it, right? And a lot of us have a difficult time telling that story. We're putting this out there, but it's difficult to get the story either because there's trauma in it or because there's challenges in it or embarrassment or we're going to hurt people in our families or break up relationships, whatever it is. And so we don't put that out there, but it's what's driving us to be creative. And that's what's happening with you.
Yeah, I that's very true. And I really started making artwork when I was transitioning out of corporate life and into creative life. And so my very first series is really about that process. And it's part of the reason I was attracted really to abstract art is because the experience is very abstract. It's very like, you're kind of like, where am I? I mean, I didn't just change careers, I
Yeah.
changed industries. I just did this leap, which is absolutely crazy. And I wouldn't recommend that anybody do it necessarily. Um, but it's, you know, I've been thinking a lot about this since we spoke yesterday, Randy, about um, Dan Martell. Like I watched a video on YouTube about from his social media person, and he was talking a lot about this moment where they were not getting a lot of views, and Dan was, putting the button down shirt on and getting up and talking about SaaS companies and how to scale and all these things. And it was getting a few thousand views. And the pivotal moment was when he started really talking about himself as a person and his values and what he personally stands for. And, when he was a teenager and, he was a troubled kid and he was, in jail. And when he, kind of found coding, and then all of a sudden, all the structure and all his energy could be funneled there. And he talked about how he at one point decided that he knew he had ADHD, but he didn't want to be on medication, and like how he overcame these things, and that this sort of very personal story was a breakthrough. And they also mentioned that the reason that he shows up and tells these stories is because he's This was so interesting because it was so specific, you know, and I haven't heard a lot of people be this specific. And that was sort of the moment that really tipped
Yeah.
my thinking was, you know, he was like, you know, because it's like he wants to help people and he's like all about helping people, but like, I want to help you. Everybody wants to help people, you know, like everybody, like who doesn't want to help people? I mean, maybe some people do that. I think there would be an outlier, but you know, who knows? Everybody's different. But when he was like, I want to help my 16-year-old self have a shot. You know, I want to help the others out there like that person. And that's why I make myself available. And I was like, oh my God, this is what my friend was talking about. Because I was like, you can do this. You know, you can have the life that you want. And it was really funny because her big thing was like, I just want to like be home and make sourdough bread and make art and be a mom and do all this and that. And I was like, and I what I did was I got her a packet of sourdough starter off of Amazon and I mailed it to her. And I just put a note in, bake the sourdough. You don't know how much time you have left. And she has that in her studio on her pin board. And every day she looks at it. And the funny thing is like, she never made the sourdough because as soon as she got the starter, she realized, I don't want to do all that work.
Okay.
I don't want to
Okay.
make sourdough bread. But that wasn't the point. You know, the point was, you know, you don't know how much time you have left and you have to do the things. You have to do the things. And even in my most, you know, the moments where I'm like, oh, you know, it'd be so much easier to just, you know, polish up the resume and start getting out there and like, you know, interviewing for another gig. And then I could do this part time. And, you know, the lie you tell yourself, because once you get into the corporate grind, you know, there's no part time, you know, that's not, there's no part time for anything else. You know, and sometimes I think, oh, that would be that in some ways would be easier, but it wouldn't be easier. It would actually be harder for me. It would be harder for me to do that.